So for this presentation, it's just based on one publication that came out January 2019, and it's specific to farm design. How I came to write this paper, I'm going to explain quickly. I started actually looking at sustainability certifications and how trade can encourage sustainable farming practices, mainly focused on coffee. Through extensive field work in 2 different countries, I became interested in the farming techniques, but maintained my interest in the trade side of things as well. I've done my permaculture course, I've done an analog forestry course, and I've done a short postgrad agroecology course. So I have brief understandings of all of these different farm design techniques, which I call them. But I found even through doing those courses, there's occasionally misunderstanding between the different approaches. And there's also some resistance from straight scientists and from a range of different types of people, particularly to permaculture. And there's so much valuable knowledge in the permaculture knowledge set that I decided to write a paper that kind of tried to bring that all apart and emphasize really valuable pieces of information that hopefully can become more accessible for everyday people, whether it's for key influencers mainly. So that's the reason I chose to write this particular article, and it's one of a publication as part of my PhD dissertation. Just what the video is blocking. Video is blocking part of the text.
Usually we can move it here. You know you can travel that fast.
So, the reason for farm designs in general is I find it's a valuable approach to transferring knowledge in agricultural landscapes. It's a way to organise information, and for some people can be more appealing, depending on who that person is. So you might get a little less resistance to change. The concept that I've developed, the objective of that is for functional biodiversity in agricultural landscape patches, so active agricultural land. But it can be non-active as well, as long as it's actually functional. And so I'm saying that farm design can significantly contribute to this functional biodiversity outcome in agricultural landscapes. That can include the conversion of monoculture systems, restoring degraded agricultural systems and landscapes, or just degraded landscapes that might become agricultural, actively agricultural. Complementing and improving existing redesign efforts or design efforts, and complementing and improving existing assessments and understandings of biodiversity outcomes in agricultural landscapes. The main reason why I emphasise functional biodiversity and improving assessments and understandings of biodiversity is I found through fieldwork as a general point that most people say, yes, it's biodiverse because we have some shade trees. And what species, I don't know, there's shade, and it fixes some nitrogen, and that's biodiversity. So yes, we have a biodiverse farm, and there's limited understanding about what that actually means. This is specific to coffee farming, which is all commercial mainly. So it's sort of like looking at how do you improve an understanding in these commercial settings of what biodiversity is, and that's why I emphasise functional biodiversity at least. So just to underline the paper, I just give a very basic definition of farm design, which is just plant and crop selections and spatial distributions. They're the key pieces. Of course, there's a lot more to farm design, but that's just the basis. So it's basically saying what plant and crops are you going to have here and how are you going to organise them as a fundamental basis. The 4 farm design approaches I consider is agroecology, permaculture, analog forestry, and agroforestry. I know that agroecology and agroforestry isn't often referred to as a farm design approach, but because I'm sort of conceptualising within a design framework, I chose to put them in there, thinking that actually they can combine. So the paper's looking at finding complementarity between these 4 farm design approaches in that way. The methods used is a narrative literature review. I've actually pulled out the philosophical differences because I find particularly with permaculture that can be a very big barrier to people even wanting to know what permaculture is, which is a real shame in my opinion. So there's like a supplement that sort of explains those philosophical differences. And then I sort of looked at pulling out information of techniques and general farm design aesthetic outcomes, and I organised the information using the conceptual frame that I developed, which is ecological sensitivity within human realities. The conceptual frame for assessment of the farm designs, I can provide more information about the actual concept after if you want to know more, but I'll just go through how it was used in this paper. So for the ecological considerations, I looked at how techniques unique to each farm design contribute to micro, system and landscape ecological conditions through improving ecological structure of agri-biodiverse systems, which is linked to the function of the system, management of movement ecology and spillover effects, which is very relevant for coffee farming, and other commercial crops, but in my case for coffee farming, and ecotone and edge effects relevant to system and landscape outcomes, which is somewhat linked to the movement ecology and spillover effects. The human realities considerations include how farm design contributes to human integration and involvement in the system through zones and functional design. That's for coffee farming, not all coffee farmers live on their farm. So that's not relevant to all coffee farms, but for small farm holdings, which the majority of coffee farms are, of those farms, and this is an estimate, the majority would live on the farm. So depending on the country, of course. So the human integration involvement in the system is a very relevant point that's often overlooked or not emphasised, and it's a real area that could really bring out the benefits of an agri-biodiverse system when they consider that side of things. The very productive preferences for the system, which is very important for coffee and probably for a lot of other commercial crops, because the argument against biodiversity is often in decreased yield, there's no way to commercially benefit from this, we're not doing it, and it's a lot of effort. There's a lot of other arguments as well, common arguments, but they're three of the key ones for coffee often. And the human capability to create and maintain a more biodiverse and potentially complex system dynamics. So that's the capability to actually bring it all together and actually keep it going over a long period of time, which can be quite challenging. So the results of what I did, I've developed this very basic visual of like to emphasize the difference of these farm design approaches through vertical biodiversity only. So we're sort of looking at how agroecology promotes a certain range of biodiversity, vertical biodiversity. I've seen a range of farms classified as agroecology that are monocultures and with not much ground, actually no ground cover. They're using somehow, but they've got a little bit of extra scientific techniques that allow it to fall in agroecology. So I wouldn't necessarily say this is a sustainable system, but it falls within agroecology. So that's why I've sort of, agroecology, from what I've seen, can actually cover a single crop intensified system, shaded monocrop, somehow agroforestry as well, but agroforestry is also included in the definition. And permaculture a little bit, but only the basics of permaculture are included in agroecology, mainly in certain zones of permaculture. Agroecology can be used or is used, but not under that name. And then you have analogue forestry, which is a different farm design that I'm not sure how many people know about analogue forestry, but it's much more about the successional development of an agroforestry system. That the priority isn't actually the yield. The priority is building a functional ecological structure first that often has multiple forest crops within that system that can be used for yield and commercial purpose. But the function of the system and developing it toward climax forest state is the primary objective. Use of succession agroforestry, which is a more standardised definition and what analogue forestry always uses, has a range there as well. On the left, it's more of a possibility range rather than being often used. And from analogue forestry, it's consistently used. And natural forest ecology, well, that just happens naturally on a daily basis. So the ESHR assessment of the 4 farm designs, I look at the farm design techniques for ecological conditions. The two that I took out was the ecotones and ecological succession. So for this paper, I tried to combine the common scientific or ecological terms that are used that are positively used for functional biodiversity, and the techniques that are used in the farm design and how they come together to try and create a bit more understanding between the disciplines. Or permaculture can be called a discipline, even though some people don't think it can. So that's sort of what I tried to do. This is just some sections from the actual paper to show how this is the edge effect is one of the key things of permaculture, and that's very similar to the ecotone idea. So I'm trying to bring that sort of understanding together as complementary, and improve an understanding of what permaculture is trying to do. I won't read through this whole section, but I think one of the key things that the edge effect in permaculture really tries to bring out that ecotones probably isn't quite there yet is this 4D forms of natural patterns and really working with natural elements to develop function in the system. So that's use of natural elements, wind, sun, shade, and precipitation and flow of these resources to increase productivity and where relevant yield, and to optimise efficiency of the system, trapping more energy materials that move through the system. Using those sorts of techniques that are often overlooked with just a simple ecotone idea. So it's sort of looking at that 4D dimension rather than just going, we're just going to make this ecologically functional and that's enough. So it's really trying to be a bit more ambitious. Of course, it takes more resources, more time to educate and all those things, but the outcomes can improve. Agroecology also considers these things, but not at this 4D forms level consistently in literature that I've found. I'm happy to be corrected. That's not what I've found so far in practice or in literature as much. It is a little bit, but not consistently as a fundamental basis of agroecology. The edge effect can also be created or maximised between forest and landscape patches and agricultural and forest patches. So this is complementary to the positive spillover idea, which is very important. Coffee is often grown in forested areas if it's grown next to a protected area or a natural forest. Natural elements can cause the coffee to travel and start growing in that natural area, which can occasionally cause problems. Of course, this can also happen by humans as well. We think all the coffee will be better in that natural forest, which isn't always a positive environmental outcome. So I'm talking about natural spillovers, but also there's the human caused spillover as well. So that's just one element of the ecological conditions that can be considered through that that are used by permaculture. And these two terms can be brought together because ecotones is commonly just used in the ecological science field. So that's an area for potential learning between those two areas, and ecological succession, which can really help. It takes more time, and this is often the barrier because in commercial settings, time isn't often given. It's about we need that yield within 3 years. That's how long coffee takes to give a little bit of a yield. So we don't want it to take 5 years. We don't care about the system structure. That's not always, it's not 100%, but it's a very common opinion. With ecological succession, if you allow the time and the skills to actually allow that natural process to occur and encourage the natural process to occur through plant and crop selections and the spatial distribution, you can create a system that's incredibly complex, ecologically complex, functional and productive. It will not be a monoculture system. So there's an issue with compromise on crop density. So then we're coming into the commercial implications, which is where I consider those in the human realities part of the paper. So the farm design techniques for human realities, you've got this capability through farm design. So the use of farm design and transfer of knowledge automatically builds this capability and understanding to improve biodiversity outcomes in agricultural systems. The two techniques used in the One's permaculture focus, which is zones for functional design. The second one's human management, with an additional focus on ecological harvest, which is taught through analog forestry because the system's so complex. So it's about how do you harvest while maintaining the system function, because it's such a different type of function to a normal agricultural system. So I think I'm assuming most people here know enough about permaculture to sort of know about the zones of permaculture, and that they're and also like a fundamental basis to permaculture. It's about whole system design and inclusion of relevant zones. And this again is that point about permaculture consistently considers the human presence on the farm as zone 0. So that's about where do you even put the spot where the farmer lives, and you consider the element or the elements in that within that consideration. It's whole system consideration, and that can be complementary to where do you put water collection, where are the animals kept. All of these can have actually positive human health outcomes. I've seen several farms that have a little bit of livestock right next to the house, so there's, I mean, it's like alarm bells for particular health issues. Water, when there's pools of water in particular tropical regions and you're looking at zoonotic disease, then you've got some other alarm bells going on. So farm design can actually be really useful to help them map out, okay, where are we putting these things, and are they causing any types of disease at all, and can we reduce that? So that's like a human realities aspect and the benefits of the farm design for those considerations. So the next one specific to human management is the ecological harvest, which, as I said, is actually taught through the analog forestry system. It's about actually intentionally creating a disturbance in the system to promote productivity, but also and clearly not over harvesting. So you really, it's an essential balance that's promoted. So you can harvest for commercial production, but you're not over harvesting, and you're not disrupting the system too much. And if you do disrupt it, you're disrupting it in a positive way to promote production. Again, that's a very specific knowledge set, and this isn't just the theoretical, I'm going to read this and understand it. It's developing this over time, actually managing a farm in this way, which is a lifestyle. It's not something you can do it part-time once you're accustomed to it. But it's years, I think, of developing that knowledge set to actually manage an agricultural system like this. And that's something that needs to be considered as well with implementation. Looking at the idea of farm design, which is often this constructed process. I mean, permaculture, a lot of people say, well, they're just indigenous techniques taken by some white guys and put it into a book. I've heard that often. And there are similarities with indigenous farming techniques and permaculture. In fact, indigenous farming techniques very much form the basis of permaculture in a way, about working with what you have, but also you look at some of the design aspects of permaculture, you look at indigenous techniques in the Andes, for example, and there are a lot of similarities in terms of the thought process that has gone on to develop these designs and the logic behind it. I don't delve so much into indigenous techniques because coffee farming, even though it's been farmed for 200, 300 years in some countries, it's more, I call it more generational techniques because it's been introduced through colonialism, and but techniques have developed over the centuries, and often farms are passed through families. So these knowledge sets are passed through families, and originally most coffee farms, although not all, were biodiverse forestry systems, not producing so much though. Then with certain phases of green revolution and all of those, or just trying to build the economy of these newly colonized countries or independent countries, they started to focus more on the commercialization and just yield, and that changed the farming processes. So there are still some farms left that are generationally biodiverse with all those techniques still there that have been handed through the families. Farm design might come in, because I don't want to champion farm design as this is the solution for everything without this consideration, which is there's an opportunity for learning and exchange rather than just a one-way transfer of knowledge, and that needs to consistently be considered. They can overlap, and yeah, some of this just is like they actually can develop intuitively or through experimentation. That it can be their own type of science, you know, so it does need to be respected. Yeah, I think I've covered that okay, and I sort of covered some, but I think that's a very important point. Then there's the idea that you have all of these farm designs that fall within a category of sustainable, but consistently there are some techniques that are used that either overlook particular things or allow them that most people wouldn't consider sustainable. So that's something else to think about if you're going to champion one farm design or look at complementarity between plant and crop selections and the inclusion of GM crops is one point where permaculture can occasionally be a bit laxed on that point on GM crops, so can agroecology. So it's sort of looking at, you know, that's more realistic maybe in some people's opinion. In other people's opinion, they would say that's not acceptable. So that's just something that's like a questionable of the sustainable farm design. Organic techniques as well aren't consistently encouraged through all these farm design techniques. So that's something that you decide externally. That's I want to do this organically. In other places, it's not possible. In other situations, it's just not possible to, or it's going to take you 3 years to actually get it to that point if you have the resources to do it. All of those considerations. So organic isn't actually included in all sustainable farm design, which most people think, oh, it probably is, but it's not. Not in the literature or in practice actually. And then there's some of the practices that have been encouraged by permaculture, for example, like tilling, are actually controversial when you look at the effect of tilling. In some cases it is very beneficial, in other cases it's not. So it's sort of like saying if you're going to use a farm design approach, everything they're recommending isn't necessarily sustainable, so you really need to be careful about what it is. So if you've got a permaculture person going on and on about tilling, that can really have momentum. And everyone can be, oh yeah, let's start tilling. But is that actually a positive environmental outcome? So that's something that needs to be considered more in all of these farm design approaches. And like I said, in some cases it's beneficial, in some cases it's necessary. But if you're wanting to be more ambitious and you have the resources, there is an opportunity to really bring that out through this type of consideration of farm design. The other one's use of biochar. Biochar has become quite popular in permaculture, or has, but there really are specific ways of developing biochar, creating it and applying it that can really create benefit rather than damage to your system. Permaculturists probably know that, but I don't think it's a consistent understanding. So that they're just like 3 points that I discussed in the paper. So the summative comment is farm designs provide a channel for transferring knowledge to society, particularly in agricultural areas, but also urban areas, when they can be understood as complementary with ecological and human realities, aspects and benefits identified. Consider existing and less organised knowledge systems to be culturally appropriate. Learn from local generational techniques and encourage reciprocal learning processes. There's great opportunity to progress how polycultures and biodiverse farms respect the human aspects. Realistically encourage implementation requirements and contribute to a functional biodiversity for long-term benefits. And I've done this in a conceptual way because I feel like that can also be useful or applied for policy recommendations and use. So it's sort of speaking a language that can go across disciplines and practitioners, theorists, that sort of thing. That's just I started calling it ESHR aligned design, which is a way of seeing how these different farm designs can align with the concept to actually promote functional biodiversity. And then I use the example of coffee farming specifically. I'll just go through this very quickly. This is an idea of some coffee farming countries and the species that are grown. These are the most commercial species or varieties traded. So it's Arabica and Robusta. And you sort of see that there's a bit of a range. In most cases, it's Arabica, a combination of Arabica and Robusta. Rarely is it all Robusta, but there are some countries that are in the majority Robusta. The variety of coffee really influences the amount of biodiversity on the farm. In a way, Robusta is a much tougher species, doesn't require as much shade. It's not as valuable, but it can grow really well over large-scale plots and really generate yield, which a lot of these countries are more interested in than coffee quality. So that's become a more popular coffee variety. I've pulled the gradient of vertical biodiversity from the first image I showed across farm designs to show the difference of the coffee system, how different they can be. The first one's an unshaded monoculture. We've got shaded monoculture, commercial polyculture, and then a traditional polyculture coffee garden forest, which is often how coffee was grown when it was first introduced to colonised countries. And then it sort of moved down the grade as they became more and more productive and commercial. In a lot of coffee farming literature that considers biodiversity, they don't often consistently consider ground cover, they only look at shade. So I've made sure that I've included the ground cover consideration in this as an additional contribution to making it as a consistent consideration. So that's like 4 types of shade cover, and it's adapted from Mexican researchers that developed this similar figure in 1999, but without the ground cover. So these are like applying the concept to the coffee example. We've got the ecological considerations and the human reality considerations specific to coffee farming. And then this is an estimate of tree density difference, shade diversity, fruit size and fruit set, which is influential to yield, and ideas of coffee quality, so the commercial implications of. Most of the time, coffee quality and yield is measured by the size of the fruit or the number of the fruits that come off the tree. The size indicates the grade or the quality most. The number indicates how much money you're going to get combined with the size of the fruit. So I look at the fruit size and set. The common misunderstanding is that if we have biodiversity on the farm, it's going to reduce crop density, which automatically people say, well, that's less yield. And they say it's going to I don't know the influence on the fruit set and fruit size. So that's an unknown. Most farmers are risk averse, so that's kind of like probably not goes in that category. Actually, biodiversity, there are several studies that prove that biodiversity on a farm can improve fruit size and fruit set, mainly through the pollination service or function of biodiversity. So that's something that's commonly misunderstood by conventional coffee farmers that needs to be better understood, so there's less resistance to increasing biodiversity on coffee farms. There's also a great opportunity for polycultures on coffee farms, but for this to happen, there needs to be that process, I call it farmer landscape heterogeneity, which is complemented by that market demand, so market profile diversification. And that really is essential for this to be a realistic outcome in the future. At the moment, most people just want coffee, and they're only going to grow coffee. If they have people coming in saying, I want coffee, but I also would like cacao, there's more of an opportunity in a particular region for them to combine them together in the same farm. So it's about thinking about how the market is actually demanding these products as well, which is an essential consideration. And this just applies that idea of respecting the generational techniques and cultural approaches through farm design specific to coffee farming. And that's the end of the presentation.
So, I understand that coffee is something that has been introduced to a lot of countries through colonialism, but it seems like also permaculture would then also be a practice that's introduced just on the basis of also having, these coffee farms introduced. I'm wondering if you see an importance in changing the language in the way that we teach about permaculture, because biochar is a very indigenous practice. some would call the ecological harvest the honorable harvest. And just, I guess I'm asking, like, do you think we could change the way that we teach people about this to give credit where credit is due?
Yes, I mean, I think the reason I included it in the paper is because I agree with the point, and I think that it can be overlooked, not by all practitioners, but it depends on the practitioner. So I just think that there could be more consistent understanding of that. There are practitioners that think they're doing it, but they're not. And I think that's more like, it's not like saying, oh, they're just not good people, or they just don't understand this. Some of them do, and they think they're doing it properly, but they're not. They're actually, in some cases, being disrespectful without knowing. They think that their system is going to solve their problems. So they're going to push that and sort of not really consider, wait a minute, maybe some of what they're doing is actually already working and we can combine it. Other practitioners consider that straight away. So it's not a absolute that all permaculturists are going in there and thinking we know better, and that's it. Also, not often is permaculture used in coffee farming systems yet. It's not actually used that much for coffee, which is also why I wrote the paper and applied it to coffee farming, because I think there's a great opportunity there as long as they respect these generational and cultural aspects. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yep. You know, coffee is in many places on the way out. In Kenya, farmers basically have given up or give up coffee to grow more maize. As we talked about maize before, maisification of the world. And that's actually the result of CGIAR, results of Gates Foundation and others who are pushing maize, and the seed companies, Monsanto and Co, right? And we know that. So that's why the problem from the maize massification comes. And it's actually impacting now a lot in many places coffee, because you have big plantations. Ethiopia, for example, has now mega farmers for coffee, run by Malaysian people, not even Ethiopians. And so I just wonder, you know, sort of, where is this all going? Because unless we're going to have true cost, and make sure that the good coffee out of forest cover, permaculture is competitive with the cheap stuff, which should be, if included all the externalities, I don't see how we're going to have a small coffee farmers. I was in Costa Rica a few months ago. People run out of coffee. Basically, in a few years, Costa Rica won't grow any coffee anymore because it doesn't pay, right? So again, so we have this idea that ideal idea of how to grow coffee. Yeah. Small farm idealism, and the reality is actually going totally in the other direction unless we do something. What I think is the question. Now, how do we going to change
I should explain that I've just actually, one of my books just came out last month, which is in Costa Rica coffee farming, and about sustainability certifications. And also the fact that my research actually goes toward an idea of movement away from coffee as a cash crop. So I don't necessarily disagree with coffee farmers being converted to, maybe not maize, but to whatever's functionally biodiverse. I'm not saying just grow coffee, because it's, you know, I'm definitely, I'm the opposite. I don't think that coffee is the second most, it's the common quote, which isn't necessarily true anymore, the second most exported commodity out of developing countries, and the first is oil. It's a very valuable industry for something that we just drink. And when we're talking about food security, why would coffee be so important and growing so much? And it's because of the history. So the first point is, I don't think that coffee should maintain in every country, but it will at certain levels, but most industries will probably decrease for several reasons, including that climate change is actually threatening a lot of the wild varieties. And coffee isn't always economically beneficial to farmers. When it is maintained on a farm, it can be grown more sustainably. And I think the less important it is commercially, the more opportunity there is to emphasize coffee quality that can be derived from biodiverse coffee systems, and the less emphasis there needs to be on monoculture plantations. So I see a move away from coffee, an opportunity to actually emphasize the benefits of biodiverse coffee systems, because hopefully there'll be less drive toward that yield quantity, and there can be a shift to yield quality. And that's a paper I've just written, and it's under review now. So that's why, in Costa Rica there has been a move away from coffee for several reasons, but also it's easier in Costa Rica because it's a different context. They have other opportunities to make the most of. Whereas in other countries, coffee is like one of their major commodity exports. So every country needs to be considered differently, and I think the benefit of looking at only one crop is that emphasises that point that every country manages coffee differently and needs it in a different way. And also, you've got Vietnam and East Timor. It was introduced a bit sooner, but Vietnam's only been introduced. Coffee has only been introduced in the 1990s, and it's mainly Robusta, and it is purely for commercial purpose. It doesn't have that colonial sort of historic tie to it. It's just about let's just produce. And those sorts of intentions for coffee are probably the most damaging. There's a quote in a biological conservation article from the 1990s or early 2000s that says coffee is has one of the most negative impacts on biodiversity of all agricultural crops, because it's naturally grown in forested areas. So there's a great opportunity there, and it doesn't mean that coffee needs to stay as a very popular crop. It just needs to change the farming techniques more consistently. Thanks.
Oh, you!
Yeah, because I'm also forwarding from online participants. The question was, have you heard about Ernst Gorch, syntropic agriculture, work from Brazil, and how would you categorize it?
Can I see the name? I just didn't. No, I haven't. No.
Okay, and
I'll look it up.
yes. And I can ask about tillage. Which tillage you mentioned, which used in permaculture and which is not conventional?
Yeah.
Is it chisel plot, or you meant something different?
The reason I brought up tillage is I know that there have been some permaculturalists that actually run courses on tillage specifically. Maybe without knowing. My understanding comes more from the scientific basis of it. Yeah, all of that sort of thing. So, I've learned about the permaculture tillage techniques, and then I've gone more into the science for a couple of years, and then I've looked at the literature research, and then sort of seen, well, I wonder if they know all of these extra details of the influence of tillage, rather than just going, well, this is like an indigenous, they've used it for centuries, let's just keep using it. Whereas some more recent scientific research has shown that it can actually do damage if you don't do it the right way. So that's more the reason, it's more of a general point. And it's the reason I made that point is just to bring the science with the permaculture sort of together a little bit.
It was in regards to tillage, as to how the different systems look at it, and when are the cases where it is beneficial and when it is not.
That's something I don't have here, I'm sorry, but it is something that needs to be considered more, I think.
One of the things that we're running into that has been discussed and documented quite a bit is just how, what is permaculture, the definition of it. There are already many different definitions in the room right now. I'm going to add another one this afternoon. So it's an ongoing challenge that has been well written about. So, in a lot of the original literature around permaculture, it's a no-till, 100% no-till technique, and yet there are many courses, including our own in Santa Cruz, that talk about, a gradient of permaculture, assemblage of practices. At our Chadwick Garden at the Center for Agroecology at Santa Cruz, we double dig. That's like what we do. And yet we have no-till research at our farm. So really permaculture is problematic when we think about permaculture as a farm practice, but when we think about it as a design system, as an assemblage of best practices, or a tool belt with many tools we can pull at different times, it becomes much more accurate and more useful. So it's oftentimes we run into problems when we think about it as a specific set of techniques.
And how often do you do the double dig?
At the Chadwick Garden or in our permaculture classes?
The garden, yeah.
At the Chadwick Garden, double digging happens for about the first 10 years, and then it moves towards side forking, which our research shows we don't need to do that actually, like at all. It's like, who's been to Singing Frogs Farm in Sonoma? Anybody? Like, you can literally take your hand and wiggle it and get your hand down like into the soil. You know, you can do the same thing at the Chadwick Garden. There's no need to till anymore. We do it for education now, just to teach the newcomers.
Yeah, maybe it also depends on, you don't just double till and leave it. You do it and then you plant something that can then shoot the carbon down into the soil. So whether you replace it, whether it makes sense to speed things up to get the carbon forming by doing the digging.
I don't think we need to do it at all anymore.
Well, after 10 years, you don't.
Even after a few years,
Yeah.
there's just no need.
An initial look at it.
It depends on your goals. You know, if you want to go quick and improve the the structure because it's compacted, sure. But if you want to have a more broad acre approach, let's say of 1,000 acres, you're not going to go until the
Okay.
So it all depends. That's the classic answer. It depends.
Thanks.
Lawyer's answer.
From what I know, permaculture is not often applied to broad-scale farming or
Last. Yeah, large scale.
yeah, it's not often applied
Oh
there.
yeah, definitely.
Not as much as it
In
could
Australia.
We'll talk about that this
be. Yeah,
afternoon.
okay.
Go ahead.
Scale question.
In coffee farming,
Yeah.
the scale or small scale, it's not used at all. So like with my idea, it's like if it were to be used, this is how it needs to be considered rather than just being people come in and saying, we know what we're doing. You know, and it's not just permaculture. There are 3 others to consider, 3 other techniques to consider as well, and sort of bring together as a tree. But even like that's the thing, even within one farm design system, permaculture, there's differences and there's discussion. Analog forestry, I think, is probably a little more united, but I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. They're broad principles, and there's so much opportunity for differences within, which is a good thing.